how would you like to be doing something like that? That is absolutely outrageous. Well, we've got somebody here today, and we're going to be spending this whole week talking about hang gliding. And today we have Rick Masters with us, and he is avid cameraman and cinematographer, and he's put together one hour-length movie that's won an award or two or three or four or something like that. And maybe you can tell us about how you got started getting into hang gliding.
Well, I was living here in the Owens Valley and I was driving up by Crawley Lake, and I saw this guy jump off a hill in an old hang glider, and he just glided down to the bottom and landed in the field. And it was one of the most incredible things I'd ever seen. It looked like a lot of fun, and I'd been walking the High Sierra every summer, walking the ridges, and I'd get up there and I'd look off these 10,000, 13,000 foot mountains. Gosh, it would be fun to fly off, but I didn't know how. And then I saw this guy flying a hang glider. I thought, hey, that's for me. And I looked into it, and I found out that 30 or 40 people a year were getting killed flying hang gliders just in the United States. There's maybe 70 people getting killed all over the world every year. So I thought, well, I'll wait. About 5 years
Just
later.
Just a slight negativeness in there.
Yeah. 4 or 5 years later, I ran into Don Partridge up in Bishop, and I said, hey, Don, how about teaching me to hang glide? And he said, yeah, I could do that. I could take you up to an intermediate level for about $50. And I thought that would be a good idea, but I started working for the Forest Service, and I never had time to learn from Don. So I ended up in Mammoth one day, and I saw a guy who had a hang glider for sale, so I bought it, and I took it up to the base of Mount Whitney, and I set it up, and I started running down Hogback Creek Road, and I lifted off of the ground, and all of a sudden I thought, wow, I don't know how to fly this thing. Barbed wire fence over here, boulders over here, and luckily I landed on the road again, and I folded it up and said, I got to learn how to do this without breaking my neck. So I went down to Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo to take mechanical engineering, and I found some people, Bill Dodson here from Bishop, and some other people were down there taking engineering too, and they taught me how to fly on the sand dunes, which is the way to do it. And I ended up crashing a whole bunch of times, but on the sand, it's okay.
Yeah, you don't hurt yourself so bad.
Owens Valley is no place to learn. That's what I say.
That's well, now, that's how you got involved, but then how did you get involved with making a motion picture? And now you're in your second one, and how did you get involved with that part of your life?
That's a pretty amazing story. I heard about these contests that Don Partridge was holding, and they sounded really neat. As a matter of fact, it sounded like science fiction, 50 guys jumping off a mountain and all of them thermaling up and heading out into Nevada going 50 miles, 70 miles. And I wanted to be in on it. I wanted to see what was happening. And when I saw what was happening, it was so neat, I wanted to tell other people about it. But I go tell them, and they think, oh, somebody jumped off a mountain, but they didn't really understand what was going on. So in the spring of 1981, I bought a camera, and I went up and I filmed the 1981 competitions that were held off of Gunter outside of Bishop. And it was the first film I ever did, and I made it pretty cheaply, but it won the 1982 Gray Prize for the best media work in hang gliding. And so I thought, hey, this is fun, and I started working on another, and I have some scenes from the one I've been working on for the last 3 years to show you along with this interview.
Well, that's great. Now, you mentioned the Owens Valley, that there's these contests in the Owens Valley. What role does the Owens Valley play in the sport of hang gliding?
Well, Owens Valley is the ultimate place to fly hang gliders, and it's recognized all over the world. You can go to Japan and find some hang glider pilots jumping off a hill or a mountain, and they don't speak any English. You say Owens Valley, and they'll start nodding their heads. They know exactly what you're talking about. A hang glider pilot's dream anywhere in the world is to come here, and that's why we have so many international pilots for every year. The highways are just full of people going back and forth, and these pilots can be from Switzerland, Austria, Australia, Japan.
Well, how are these hang gliders controlled? You see them jumping off these mountains and flying around up there. How do you control something like this?
Well, a lot of people think that they're hard to control or they're not very controllable, but actually the truth is it's just the other way around. You can turn these things on a dime. We can fly them 100 miles, always in total control. And the way it works, it's called weight shift. And we fly in a device called a harness. And our body is inside the harness. And by hanging at the central point in the hang glider, by pushing our weight forward, we make the hang glider fly faster. Moving back, we slow it down. and throwing our weight to the right or the left makes us turn. It's really simple and it's really easy to do.
So this whole thing is around your body, is that correct?
Yeah, it keeps you nice and warm at high altitude. We can get up to 18,000 feet or even higher on one of these things.
So there are companies now that are making all this equipment for hang gliding.
Yeah, there's quite
professionally.
an industry established worldwide. Europe, the United States, Japan, they all have their own industries for making hang gliders and equipment.
Boy, well, now that you've gotten up in this hang glider and you've got all this equipment on, how come you go so far? Why do you go so far?
Well, you see, in Owens Valley in particular, the ground heats up in the morning, and the warm air on the ground starts to flow up the sides of the mountains. And every once in a while, a big old bubble of air kind of stagnates there in the sun, and then it breaks off and it rises almost straight up. And if we can fly into that bubble, we feel like, say I'm flying along like this, and all of a sudden my wingtip rises a little bit. Well, that means my wingtip's gone under a bubble of hot air. And all I have to do is throw my weight to the left, and I can turn in it, and I can gain thousands of feet. I can get up above the tops of the mountains. And it's a fantastic view up there. Then when I get as high as I can in the thermal, I glide until I find the next thermal, and I ride it up. So I just go from thermal to thermal to thermal until I've gone 100 miles, 150
You can't
miles.
see these thermals.
No,
You
they're
just have to feel them.
Well, no, we decided that the birds have it figured out, but we aren't quite smart enough. I don't know why. So we made a little device called a variometer, and when we enter a thermal, it chirps. It goes beep, 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 and it tells us we're going up. So when we hear that thing go beep, 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 we start to turn, and up we go.
On a spiral motion.
Just watching the world spin below us. It's marvelous.
It's marvelous.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's always been man's dream to fly. A lot of I know little kids when they're growing up, they dream about flying. It's a free feeling.
Mm-hmm. And hang gliding is the freest feeling of all flying.
It seems like hang gliding would be just about the closest to flying, except for those power pack, those jet packs that they've come up with that you can...
Oh, no. Hang gliding's got everything else, Steve. There's nothing to compare to it. You're just hanging out there in the wind, flying along like Superman.
Sounds good to me, doesn't it? Now, what if you're up there 15,000 or 12, what did you say, how far did you go up?
You name it, up to 18,000.
18, and something happens. Is it dangerous?
Well, yeah, if something happens, it can be real dangerous. Frequently, you run into turbulence, and turbulence can be caused by all sorts of things in the air. We're not even sure what, but there's like waves in the wind that come down real strong, and other waves are coming up, and bam, right at the junction, you can get all this stuff, and if you fly into it, even a hang glider will break up. And when a hang glider breaks up, you have to throw your parachute. And it's pretty easy to do.
Now that was something I was wondering. Do you wear a parachute?
Oh, everybody wears a parachute. You know, back in the early days of hang gliding, people were getting killed because something would go wrong with their glider, and they'd fall out of the sky and die on impacts. But these days, you never, in the Owens Valley, you never find a pilot flying without a parachute. Now, this is mine right here. If I have a problem with my glider, I'm hooked into that glider with these carabiners. Say my wing breaks. Well, I grab this handle and I pull out the safety clips right here, and then I pull it to the side, and out comes my chute. Now the chute is in this little bag. What I do is fling it really hard away from my wreckage, and the chute deploys. And since I have the chute and the hang glider, I'm still hooked into the hang glider here, I come down pretty slow. You rarely see pilots even getting injured when they throw a chute these days. And it's made hang gliding a whole different sport, because it used to be, you know, if anything went wrong, you're going to get killed.
That's it. That was the ultimate.
But now if something goes wrong, you're probably just going to end up with a big mess. I mean, look at all these shroud lines. You got to untangle those from whatever tree you land in. But that's okay.
Yeah, that's better than dying.
Yet.
That's for sure.
I haven't thrown my chute. I doubt I will. I check my equipment very carefully and make sure that...
Do you have to repack it every once in a while? And
yeah, you repack it about twice a year. You want to make sure it's nice and soft and it'll open up.
Easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want any faults. That's the only parachute you've got on there.
That's it. You got one chute. But you know, you don't... Even a chute isn't always necessary. In 1983, a Venezuelan had a wing break and turbulence over Silver Canyon near Bishop, and the glider started spinning. It had one good wing, and that wing was making it spin like a top. He was spinning so hard that he couldn't raise his hands up to his parachute. We figured about 10 G's. He went around and around like that. He hit the ground in between the power lines in Silver Canyon, and he was fine. They took him to the hospital. They couldn't believe it. It's because when you spin so fast like that, you come down real slow. He must have hit about 15 miles an hour, maybe 10. He landed on a bush.
On a bush.
Yeah.
Just as long as it wasn't a thorn bush.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, how do you learn how to do something like this? Now, you've got my curiosity up. What do I do if I want to learn, and is it expensive?
It depends on how you learn. If you find a friend who has been trained to be a hang gliding instructor, he may teach you for very little, those expenses. You can go down to Southern California where they have classes and hang gliding schools. Now all of these schools are accredited by the United States Hang Gliding Association, and the people who train you really know what they're doing. If you get some guy who doesn't know what he's doing training you, you're liable to injure yourself. So make sure the guy is a USHGA certified instructor, and don't try to learn in the Owens Valley in the summertime. There's thermals everywhere. You'll take off a little hill, boom, crash, because you don't know how to control the glider.
Rick, you've been mentioning this contest constantly, several times during the early part of this interview. This is the contest that happens once a year here in the Owens Valley. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, this contest is regarded throughout the world as the ultimate contest in hang gliding because we go hundreds of miles further than any other XC contest. The awesome conditions of the Owens bring pilots from all over the world, and we hold it in the very best part of the summer, which is usually the last week of June or the first 2 weeks of July, somewhere in there. We schedule it right before the U.S. Nationals and right after the World Meet in Kos, Austria.
Now, the World Meet in Austria, that is for hang gliding.
That's for hang gliding, right.
And the ones here is the nationals, is that right?
We have the every country has a national competition.
Okay.
And the United States is no exception. So we try to, the Owens Valley usually has a precedence on the time slot because we have the best conditions and the contest is very widely respected.
Do you think the world competitions would ever be held here?
I hope to hold the world competitions here in a few years.
That would be absolutely fantastic.
It would be incredible.
It would sure bring a lot of people here,
Yes,
wouldn't it?
it would. It would bring a lot of national attention, too.
What is the Cross Country Pilots Association?
Well, the Cross Country Pilots Association is a large group of international competition and fun pilots who come to the Owens Valley every year. And in 1984, the previous people who've been holding the hang gliding competitions here announced that they weren't going to hold a contest. So because I'd made the film and I live here in the Owens Valley, I'm one of the few hang glider pilots here, I was besieged with calls from all over the world asking me to save the contest. So I thought, how can I do this? I don't have any money. I can't go into retail. I mean, I didn't want to go into retail. Hang gliding retail is kind of a risky business. So I thought the best way to do it would be to set up a club. And I sent out notices to all the hang gliding magazines in the world, French, German, Australian. They all ran ads for free. And we started the Cross Country Pilots Association.
Rick, this contest that you've been talking about is coming up pretty soon. When is this contest?
Well,
this year.
We're gonna start out at the historic site Gunter Launch up in the White Mountains outside of Bishop, and that'll be for 4 days starting on June 26th. Then the next 3 days we're going to go down to Independence and have it off of Mazurka Peak where we held it last year. Then we're going to take a break of 1 day. That'll be July 3rd. We won't be flying. Then on Independence Day we're going to go to Gordo where all the world records are set. We'll be there for 4 days. Then we're going to go to Horseshoe Meadows, and anybody can drive up to Horseshoe Meadows and see us launch. That'll be the 8th, 9th, and 10th of July. Then we're going to have an award ceremony in Independence on the 11th, and everyone's invited to that. That's at our big headquarters.
Well, we got a whole lot of days here that if you miss one, you can get another one.
It's a 2-week contest. We're going to go from the 26th of June to the 10th of July with an award ceremony on the 11th. And if you just have a 2-wheel drive car and you want to go up and see the site without, getting in a Jeep and banging up the mountains, you can go to Horseshoe Meadows on the 8th, 9th, or 10th of July.
And we're going to try to get there and film some of that and list for all you that just can't possibly get out. We'll try to cover some of that so you'll be able to get to see some of that exciting footage.
Oh, one more thing. Whenever our pilots land, they have a landing verification form. And if you see a pilot on the ground, just stop and sign his form to show that he landed in this particular spot, because they get 1 point for every mile they fly.
Oh, okay. That's great.
We expect to fly maybe 1,400 miles during the 2 weeks of this contest.
One single person or all everybody?
Each pilot
everybody.
Has the potential of flying that far.
Rick, thanks for coming in.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
It has been great, and I really have enjoyed this, and I hope all of you have enjoyed the footage. And stay tuned, because we're going to be showing you more of that throughout the week. We'll be back after these few messages. We're continuing our week-long look into hang gliding, and Rick Masters is back with us. And we're going to look into the historical parts of hang gliding, and then later on we will start looking at the film that Rick put together in 1981 of the competition held then.
Yes, it's called Aeoli, Comet Clones and Pod People, and you'll find out why it's called that as soon as it starts to roll.
This is the final conclusion of what I wanted to get to, is how did now this hang gliding come to the Owens Valley? How did anybody find that this was the best place in the world?
Well, I think this is one of the great stories in aviation. Hang gliding began over 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, it's probably the oldest way man has flown. They were flying hang gliders before balloons. They were just crashing all the time. But if you take a look here and there in history, way back, there was somebody who jumped off a roof and made it 300 feet or something like that. And then they invented the balloon, and people really started, getting up in the air. And then in Europe, about the 1880s, a fellow named Lilienthal started making bamboo and paper hang gliders and flying them off the hills, and he got real famous. And a fellow down in San Diego about the same period of time named Montgomery was taking an acrobat from a circus, and he put him in a hang glider he designed, and he was taking him up in balloons and doing demonstrations at state fairs. The guy was actually looping the hang glider. This was back before the turn of the century, before the Wright brothers. And then the Wright brothers started, and they were flying hang gliders too off the sand dunes. And they thought, well, it's not very practical just flying over sand dunes. They wanted to go somewhere. So they said, we put an engine on this thing. And bam, they put an engine on their hang glider, and it was an airplane, and hang gliding just quit. Nobody did any hang gliding for years and years. As a matter of fact, it was about 70 years before hang gliding started up again in about 1971.
No kidding.
Yeah, a high school teacher named Jack Lambie in Newport Beach saw some designs of an old Chinook biplane, and he published them in Popular Mechanics or some magazine like that. And he went on vacation. He came back. There were 3 shopping bags full of orders for his plans. And everybody built these things, and they all wanted to get together. So he said, let's hold a contest. And in 1971, they held a contest at Newport Beach. And none of these people knew how to fly these hang gliders, but they were all running off the hill and trying to go as far as they could. And they could only go about 100 feet. And it was hilarious. It stopped traffic. It backed the highway up. The police came out and said, you can't do this. Who's the meet director? And Lambie said, we don't know. Well, these people went home, and they wanted to go further and further. So they made little improvements on their designs, and gradually they found out they could go 200, 300 feet. And some really crazy ones started jumping off of mountains around Los Angeles. Yeah, some of them got killed because these things would fall apart in the air.
Daring young men and their flying trapeze.
Daring young men, yeah. And after a year, I think it was 1972, the son of the Palomar Observatory astronomer, his name was Taras Kasinik, took off in a biplane of his own design from Torrance Beach and went up instead of down. And he went back and forth in front of the crowd. And everybody was amazed. And all of a sudden, the sport of hang gliding was more than just gliding, it was soaring. And they started flying this particular design called the Icarus II off of mountains and off of the cliffs in Hawaii. And it was a real performer. 73, 74, lots of people were flying. They liked the collapsible gliders called the Regalos that were designed as a Navy project by Francis Regalo back in 1948. These things you could fold up and put on your car. They only cost $20, $50 to build, and they were flying them all over California. I mean, the sport exploded in California and spread throughout the world. in the wintertime, people were putting skis on their feet and flying off mountains with these things. And they didn't have a very good glide, and the pilots didn't know how to fly them, and they weren't very responsive. They didn't turn very well, and people were crashing all over the place. So hang gliding was known in the middle 70s as the most dangerous sport in the world, the real death sport, and it had a terrible image that we still suffer from today. Yeah. But with all these people dying, the hang gliding manufacturers got together and said, we've got a big problem. We've got to find out what is causing the problems with our hang gliders, because the things would be flying along and stall, and they go into a dive right into the ground. They wouldn't recover. And the hang gliding manufacturers found out if they put little tip struts on them, they'd go into a dive and recover. And all of a sudden, the death rate was cut in half. Then people started wearing parachutes, and the death rate was cut in half again. So we went from maybe 40 a year. Last year, we had 4 or 5 free-flight fatalities. And most of these people were doing things, flying in conditions they shouldn't have been flying in.
Well, it seems like that's the way with any sport. If you do what you're supposed to do, your chances are slim to none. But if you go against what the rules are, then you're asking for it.
Mm-hmm. And the way we got to Owens Valley with hang gliding, Bishop resident Don Partridge went down to Torrance Beach, and he saw a hang glider, and he thought, wow, this looks like fun, and he brought one back up to the Owens Valley. And he went out to Eureka Valley sand dunes, and he started teaching some of his friends to fly hang gliders, and that was in 1974. And by 1975, Don was jumping off at Coyote Peak on the Sierras and the high launches on the White Mountains, and he was learning how to fly here in this most turbulent place in the world. And a lot of people were watching what he was doing because they didn't think you could fly the Owens Valley. They thought it was too dangerous. In 1977, the California champion sailplane pilot, George Worthington, took a look at hang gliding, and he said, hey, nobody set any world records in this sport. And the FAI, that's the Sport Aviation Agency for World Records in Aviation, had just established world records for hang gliding. So George came up to Bishop, and he met Don, and they started flying the Owens Valley, and before you knew it, George had set all the world records for men here in the Owens Valley. And driving back and forth all summer like this, Don and George talked a lot, and they thought, why don't they hold a big competition? And in 1978, Don put together the first competition in the Owens Valley, and we're going into our 8th year of Owens Valley competitions now. And we have Don Partridge to thank for this. Of course, Don was killed last September in a airplane crash.
Had nothing to do with hang gliding.
No, it was the same kind of aircraft that George Worthington had been killed in Bishop.
And we're going to be continuing through this week, showing you the film that Rick made. And this film was made, maybe you can explain this film.
Yeah, this is the 1981 competitions. That year Don put on 3, the qualifier, the Open, and the cross-country classic. The first one, the Open, was any kind of aircraft could fly in it. And there's some rigid wings in there that have rudders. And they're kind of interesting. One of them is the fastest hang glider, I think, that existed at that time. It was Eric Raymond Sunseed, very famous glider.
We're going to be showing you all this rest of this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That film, we'll break it up into 4 segments, and maybe you can tune in and watch this. This is an extremely interesting film if you haven't seen it before. And Rick, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming in and telling us the history and what's going on, and showing the footage that you did bring in today. And hopefully we'll be able to cover your hang gliding contests from year to year.
Good. I expect this event to become a lot bigger than it is now.
First classic, and everyone was just, you could feel the fear for people wondering, could hang gliders really fly in afternoon turbulence in the Owens Valley. That was the main thought on my mind this season, the winter before Worthington came up here, was this is the deciding point in hang gliding history. If these things can actually fly in this place, this the most turbulent place on Earth in the most turbulent time of day, then they're going to prove themselves as worthy aircraft, otherwise they're just toys.
In the summer of 1981, the Aeoli, the Comet Clones, and the Pod People came to the Owens Valley.
Yesterday we had a pilot at launch fly. He was within 200 feet of the ground, hit a dust devil that he could not see because the ground is still relatively moist, believe it or not, compared to what it will be later when the dust picks up easier. This pilot, Luke's Cassetta, did a full loop upon entering the dust devil at 200 feet from the ground. The loop brought him right back into the dust devil. He was thrown up into a 90-degree wing over and dropped out. Dick pulled it off pretty well and caught the rest of the dust devil and thermaled up. Okay, so we avoid dust devils. I don't think that even needs to be said. Dick couldn't see this one yesterday. Eric says he had on polarized sunglasses and Eric was able to see it.
Eric's got magic glasses.
Psilocybin, man. So the dust devils are, one might say, an obvious danger. The insidious, unobvious danger, and I think the most dangerous thing to do in the Owens Valley is to land at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a calm day in the summertime.
Don Partridge had chosen these pilots from among the world's best to compete in the third cross-country open. Many of them didn't know quite what they were getting into, but they would soon find out. It took a couple hours for the trucks to make the long grind up to Gunter Launch, a mile above the valley floor, and then Don would give the pilots another hour to assemble their gliders. Eric Raymond, the first pilot to ever execute 2 consecutive loops in a hang glider, was here, flying his incredible Elevon-equipped Sunseed.
Losing it. What this meet would be like without Larry Tudor in it. I'd be walking all over everybody. That's the way it was last year. At the end of the meet, I had a 25-point lead. I didn't even have to fly the last day. But I did, and I won it anyhow. Where are you going today? Far. Very, very far. If I get away, that is. Have you got me as 44? 44? Yeah. 44.
In the sport of hang gliding, to fly the Owens Valley is regarded as the ultimate experience. We watched Mike Brewer of California launch his Aeolus into fairly weak conditions. Down he went. Down. He went way down around the mouth of Coldwater Canyon. Everybody was absolutely convinced he was gone. How amazed we were to find out that as he pulled his feet out of his harness to land at Don's ranch, bam, he got hit by a thermal and took it up to make an official world altitude gain record. The British were here. The Royal Air Force even sent its own hang gliding team. The Open was a series of elapsed time races. The pilots were free to wait until the moment they thought conditions were best. Then they would launch. Their time was measured from the moment their feet left the ground to the instant they flew over the goal. Some of the pilots, like Mike Brewer, never flew without a barograph signed and sealed.
There, it's a pretty cool official seal.
Like most hang gliding contests, there were no restrictions on the types of hang gliders entered in the Open. Because of their superior performance, the rigid wings, which utilized pilot-actuated drag rudders or ailerons for control, had been banned in 1979 by the FAI from competing against the other basic type of hang glider, the flex wing, in which the pilot controlled with weight shift alone. But Don Partridge ignored this ban when he created the Open in 1979. In a search for the ultimate cross-country hang glider, Don saw a need for the fast and efficient rigid wings to continually be tested against the extraordinary thermaling capabilities of the rapidly developing flex wings. Now it was 3 years since the ban had gone into effect. The flex wings had progressed from a single wing surface to a double wing surface, creating a more efficient airfoil. The skill of the pilots as well was constantly improving. In the races along the White Mountains, pilots would frequently spend an hour or more at altitudes where oxygen was a necessary requirement. Not everyone had the right attitude about high-altitude takeoffs.
I'd seen a couple of years in hang gliders before they were capable of using thermal lift and before we even got around to taping burials and things onto us. What happened is the FAI established world records, and then cross-country became more, the thought of the possibility of it started to occur. You saw guys like Trip Millinger flying 15 miles from somewhere, you know, and then a 26-mile flight down there, and then the world's records were accepted by the FAI, and he came up here in '76 and with Gene Blythe, and they flew from Saratoga to Big Pine 46 miles and established world records for hang gliding. That was the start of cross-country, but we still had, everyone had this desire for cross-country, but we hadn't figured out how to see who was best yet.
In the summer of 1978, Don Partridge held the first cross-country classic.